It's Talking Joe, and today we are talking G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 309, out August the 21st. In this issue, Cobra Commander strikes back, and in Springfield, Dawn Moreno will have her revenge. What do we think? Find out in a minute. A car is burning, a cop is inside. He's killed both your parents, weighs on your mind. The ninjas are coming, mutants dropping in. Zartan's expected, dreadnoughts begin. Commander is armored, Serpent is near. The Springfield's a nice town, but it's run by Cobra. Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. If you're new to the show, you can find out all about us over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Now, today we will be talking about G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue 309, which was released on August 21st, 2024. And joining me, as always, to talk about it, it might be Tim, but he's wearing this gigantic battle armor. It could be anyone behind that. Tim, is it you?
Hello, Mark. I'm actually... hello, Mark. I'm actually a CG, and the real Tim is back at headquarters watching all of this on a monitor.
Good to have you on, Tim. Or not, Tim.
What does this Tim do when he podcasts with you? Does he just sing? Does he just sing the entire dialogue of a comic book?
Yeah, he mostly does the singing.
And now there are his tanks coming down the street. Better get down here, Baroness. The fur is about to fly.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself, am I going to have a jingle, a new song for this? Because sometimes inspiration strikes very strong, and I've got something rattling about my brain. Sometimes it doesn't, and I thought, I'm going to run dry. But then I came up with something for this one, which is going to be Clash inspired.
Maybe I'll sing one of the letters from the letters.
Okay, you could too. So this issue was brought to us by the standard creative team of the last few issues, which are writer Larry Hama, pencils Paul Pelletier, inks Tony Kordos, colorist Francesco Segala with Sabrina del Grosso, who is the flatter, letterer Pat Brousseau, Alex Antone is the editor, publication design from Jillian Crab, creative consultant Diana Davis. Now, before we get into the middle of the comics, let's start with the front of them. Tim.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Cover A is drawn by Andy Kubert and colored by Brad Anderson, as has been all the previous issues in this Skybound, A Real American Hero run. And this cover is a doozy. It is, it's okay. If you can imagine some of the most exciting kinds of G.I. Joe covers, you might be thinking a bunch of Joes on a vehicle running and driving toward you, kind of like issue 1, Marvel 82, or Skybound issue 301. Or you might be thinking Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, cool pose, badassery, Marvel 45, Marvel 53, both by Mike Zeck, or maybe something villain-centric, right? And another category that you might get around to after those top three could be the coolest Joes doing a cool thing that's half pin-up, exciting badassery pose, but also half story. So this cover, there are 4 Joes, and they are all battle ready, and they are heading from left to right. Snake Eyes is in the center, and he's sort of crouching, standing. He's got 2 swords, not one sword. He's got 2 swords, and these very much look like his 1985 version 2 swords, if that action figure had come with not 1 but 2. Behind him is Storm Shadow, also with 2 swords. And then behind him in the distance, pretty small, but still, because of silhouette, long ponytail, and red visor, and a little bit of helmet detail, entirely recognizable, Don Marino with one sword drawn, but...
just one sword, sad.
But two scabbards and a sword in a scabbard on her back.
Potential for two swords.
And then in the extreme foreground is Scarlet, and compositionally all we can see are head and shoulders and arms, but she's actually obstructed, so all we really see are half of her head and one hand and one partial arm, and she's holding her crossbow. And the other elements of this cover are a lot of really powerful negative space on the right 2/3 of the cover, which is to say open sky, but orangey sunset that's cloudy or smoky, as if there's fires wail in the distance. But these characters are not lit by a fire in front of them. There's no, yellow rim highlight. They are coming out of the woods, and there are 2 or 3 trees, sort of big tree trunks that are at strong diagonals, as if some of this forest has been hit by rockets or missiles, and the forest is somewhat chopped up and exploded. Behind Storm Shadow in the Dawn Marino sort of plane of the cover, she is standing on sort of chunks of tree and wood at some diagonals, as if they've been shot up. What a cool cover. And then Brad Anderson, as he often does, very sharply further separates the planes, the distances from the quote camera in this cover with some color cast. So in the extreme foreground, Scarlet has a lot of blue and green mixed into her weapon, and those tree trunks that are at the bottom left and bottom right corners. In the distance, Storm Shadow and Dawn are knocked back with some pink and pale orange. And then in sort of the middle of the cover, I'm having a hard time telling quite what is mixed into Snake Eyes' base gray. On the left side, it's a reddish, and on the right side, it's a dull yellow. But Brad Anderson, by adding these colors to these different distances from the camera, he further separates them and adds a lot of interest to the cover. And he's one of my favorite colorists in comics, and he's currently coloring most of the books for Ghost Machine, which is this imprint at Image, which is best known for a bunch of Jeff Johns written comics, but that's not all it is. And it's an exaggeration to say I'm reading Geiger by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank for the colors, but oh man, does Brad Anderson color a handsome monthly book in the form of Geiger. Cover B for G.I. Joe 309 is that same Andy Kubert cover in black and white, and it still completely works in black and white because Kubert is such a sharp designer in terms of composition and inker in terms of designing where light and shadow can enhance and separate elements. There's just a little bit of sort of texture that you pay attention to more because of a lack of color. So the way that he inks Dawn in the distance and the sort of tree bits that she's standing on, there's some hatching rather than solid blacks, and I'm really aware of the texture of all the chunks of wood and some white paint or whiteout on a toothbrush sort of spritzed onto Snake Eyes' sword, not the one that's black against the white sky, but the one that's white in front of the tree just under ER of Real American Hero. To give colorist Brad Anderson a place to do a metallic reflection that you would mistakenly call a lens flare. It's not a lens flare. Very, very sharp. I'm so taken by both Andy Kubert's black and white execution, but also just the editorial decision to run these as open to order, not ratio variant covers. Your store can order as many or as few of these black and white covers, and they sure pack a punch.
A little detail here. We spotted it on a previous Andy Kubert cover that Storm Shadow's Cobra sigil can be seen in the black and white, but that's been corrected for the color cover to remove it. And I think that happened on, or was it 302 or something?
Right, sure.
And it actually made it into some solicit detail as well. I see that the cover to 309, as appears on the Diamond Previews website, has that logo coloured red. So it did progress a little way down the chain before it was noticed. It also prompts me as well to think about that costume that Storm Shadow is wearing, the white V1 costume without the Cobra sigil here. It does look a little bit like there's a gap on his chest there that does need to be filled. So it feels like a little bit like the uniform needs some sort of tweak to be fully complete.
My one tiny nitpick about both A and B is that Andy Kubert, in drawing Scarlet's eyes, I'm a little unclear on sort of where the pupil, where the cornea, where the iris is. I think he's definitely drawn it correctly, but of all the things that I love about Andy Kubert's drawings, the way that he draws eyes has never been my favorite thing. And he does draw good eyes, but I guess there are artists who draw eyes that I like a little more. And I have found many of his eyes over the years to be, this is not a scientific word, squinty. And I'm getting a little bit of that here. But again, so much else about the cover is just, this is one of those covers that reminds me that not every artist in comics is a cover artist. And there are some who really can only do covers because of time or sort of a lack of sequential storytelling ability, but man, are they great cover artists. And there are artists who draw really good interiors and storytelling, and their covers are good, but never great. And then there is a handful of really stellar comics artists who do both, and Andy Kubert is one of them. All right, cover C is the 1:10 ratio variant. This is drawn by Brad Walker and colored by interior colorist Francesco Segala. Once again, we've got one or two Joes in the foreground, sort of at 2/3 size. We don't see full body, but we see head, torso, and some of legs. It's Flint with a shotgun and Lady J with her javelin shooting gun from her original action figure. Flint is heading left, which is a bit of a contrast, and Lady J is heading right. He's got gritted teeth. She's yelling. They're pulled forward with a lot of green. I don't mean because they've got green as a local color in their clothing. I mean, if you look at their complexion, that's not sort of a peachy, reddish, pale Caucasian. There's green mixed in there. And this pops in front of the red head cackling Major Blood, and he's facing left. All we see is 2/3 of his head and his helmet. No neck, no shoulders, no body. And separating the foreground and the background is this explosion, which is just a reddish and light reddish explosion. And then the background behind Major Blood is just a dark red to darker red gradient. There's no clouds, there's no mountains, there's no trees. It's a cool cover.
Looking at this cover, it makes me think that we've not yet seen Flint, I don't think, in this Skybound era. We've not seen him for a while. And we've not seen Major Blood for a good long while as well. There was that Baroness flashback issue to the kind of the time that she was flying the Rattler with Wild Weasel in the issue 30s.
Yeah, you're referring to it was like a year and a half before the end of the IDW run.
Yeah, and then before that, I think it was a good long time that we saw Major Blood. There was that issue set in one of the Southern American countries, I think, where he was propping up some local dictator, and Chuckles went all John Wick on him. I think that might have been the last time we saw him in the continuity.
Did we not see him in 275, even though 275, or in Snake Hunt, even though that 10-part story was advertised as featuring every living Joe and Cobra?
I don't remember seeing Major Blood in that.
I haven't checked, but I
don't
also
think so.
Don't remember.
I don't think so. We had there was Crystal Ball. Maybe that's who you're thinking of.
Folks, if you were missing Snake Hunt, I know a comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts that doesn't do mail order, but might make an exception for a Talking Joe listener, Joe fan, that does have all of Snake Hunt.
Yeah, but Major Blood, such a great character. So great to see him in Duke in the Energon universe. I hope he's a character that does get reintroduced into a Real American Hero again before too very long.
This is one of those cases where I can imagine a different publisher. If this was like, regular X-Men and Ultimate X-Men, I can sort of imagine an editor saying, Major Blood is showing up in, Ultimate G.I. Joe. So, hey, writer of regular G.I. Joe, maybe don't use him right now. But I am certain that Larry Hama is not getting any kind of restrictive character notes like that from Skybound editorial that they say, what do you want to do? Do whatever you want. And he's like,
okay, what do you want to do? Okay, do that.
I'll do whatever I want. Do you want to talk about the retailer exclusive variants, Mark?
This month, it's a bit of a switch up. We don't have any of the regular occurring artists that we've been seeing. No Mike Mayhew this month, and no Clayton Crane. Instead, it is an exclusive for 616 Comics from Tiago da Silva, available in two versions. Interestingly enough, there's a standard Virgin cover with no logo, and then there's a zoomed in variant, which is the same image but just cropped in a little bit more tightly, and the image is in quite a nice looking image of Snake Eyes scaling a wall with an obvious homage there to issue 21. A little bit generic, but it's a nice looking cover generally.
Yeah, this is that. I don't know if I assume that this is a filter in Photoshop or Procreate. I don't know if that's true, and if so, I don't know what it's called, but there is an effect where all of the edges on this cover, sort of, where Snake Eyes' head ends and the sky behind him starts, or, where his belt, ends and it becomes his abs. There is a little bit of color shifting sort of everywhere and all over that looks a little bit like you're looking at this on an old television, like a cathode ray tube, a CRT TV. It's cool. There's even like a green line at the top of the cover that looks like, you're like watching an old VHS tape and you've got these horizontal sort of color fuzzes. It's cool. It also feels like I'd also be happy without it. It is a bell and whistle. I don't mind it, but I think it is unnecessary.
Yeah, it's like one extreme. You've got someone like Chris Samney, very sort of simplified black and white, often coloured with very flat, basic colours, and then the other spectrum, you've kind of got the very rendered, very computer graphically coloured, photorealistic end of the spectrum with filters, etc. over the top of that, and that's more along this line. And some both spectrums can work, but obviously mileage varies.
The Da Silva cover, I love the pose. I love the tension. I like that it is a reference to issue 21 at Marvel, but it's not the exact same pose. There's no rope. He's got a sword and I don't know. So here's my question: what is happening with Snake Eyes' left hand? What is he holding?
I think he's balancing a weapon of some description, and it's almost pointing directly at us. So we're sort of seeing the muzzle flare of the Uzi-like weapon, whatever it actually is, firing somewhat towards us. So it's sort of got a bit of that force perspective, meaning that we can't see very much of it. Sort of a hint of the weapon itself, and his hand grasping it below what I think is a light mounted on the side of it. What's
the bit that's on the other side of his knee? I thought that maybe he's not pointing it kind of at us. He's pointing it kind of at the building, not because he's aiming at the building, but because he's sort of twisting right now. And we actually see the bottom of his hand and the bottom of the
Yeah, I think
handle.
just below his knee might be like the very base of an extended magazine coming out the bottom of the handle.
Okay. All right, and I wonder if, in addition to sort of not the usual suspects for variant covers, taking an unscientific survey of your recollection, Mark, is this fewer retailer variants than in previous issues?
Yeah, I mean, probably the average that we've seen has been 2 or 3, I'd imagine. And essentially here we've got basically 1, even though I mean, it's 2 covers technically, but it's the same image repeated.
I wonder if now that we are 9 months into this comic, some of the excitement has worn off. You know, everyone's clamoring to do a retailer variant for the first issue back, you know, after a year off, you know, and Skybound's relaunching the Larry Hama main book. And then, you know, we're 9 months in, and, you know, all the stores and artists who might do this kind of work, you know, are they focusing on other things, whether it's, you know, the Energon universe or just every other comic. So I wonder if, you know, 310, 311 will continue this trend. And then, you know, maybe if something big happens, you know, a few months after that, you know, a character shows up, a character exits, there's a double-sized issue, there's a big battle, something. I wonder if this is a new normal for Real American Hero retailer variants.
Yeah, potentially. And I think, you know, part of the driver for the number of covers has been the artist exclusive, you know, subsection of retailer excuses. So like if Mike Mayhew or Clayton Crane are seeing like diminishing returns, that they're not quite getting the same level of numbers for their 5th cover, you know, versus their first, that maybe that's a factor, or just, you know, time or whatever, maybe they'll come back to it. But yeah, I suspect that they're just seeing that drop off, and they're moving on to the next thing.
Yeah. All right, we're inside the comic now.
Right, so let's go with a plot breakdown.
Plot breakdown.
In Springfield, battle-armored Cobra Commander, flanked by Heat Vipers, does battle with the mutant Cobra army being dropped from the skies above. Heat Vipers are defeated, but Cobra Commander grabs their missiles and throws them at the attackers' heads. This bravery in battle inspires the troopers on the ground. It is later revealed that it is a Crimson Guardsman in the armor rallying the troops. Serpentor is outraged by the turn of events on the ground and plans to head to Springfield to show them how it is done in person. Meanwhile, Zartan's truck has crashed into a maggot on the outskirts of Springfield. The Dreadnoks turn their recon expedition into an unintended battle with the mutant cyborgs. On Cobra Island, the recon team there liberates a Cobra freezer with a body inside and exfiltrates on their Zodiac boat with Mindbender in tow as their prisoner. Also sneaking around Springfield are the G.I. Joe Ninja team, who happen upon a police cruiser which contains a trapped Springfield cop, the very cop who had shot Dawn's parents. As the car catches fire, she is left with a dilemma. Does she kill him, rescue him, or leave him to burn?
To be continued.
Tim, where do you want to start?
So some previous issues we have talked about Hama juggling 6 or 7 subplots or locations and sets of characters. And this one, I thought, oh, is this one only 3? And then I thought, no, it's 4. Oh, no, I think this is actually 5. It's several, but they're more converging.
Yeah.
And they feel more immediately connected to each other. It's not like 3 of these pages were cutting to like a C-130 flying over, you know, Australia, and a Joe pilot, and like a new Joe, and like a Joe we haven't seen for 10 years, or like parachuting down.
Yeah, they're all. It's like they're all all revolving around this one event in Springfield, essentially. That with the I guess with the exception of the recon team on Cobra Island, that's somewhat separate.
Yes, because it is fast, because Mindbender is there, it feels connected, even though it is not connected, because it's, they're in a hurry, they're fleeing, they're in trouble. One of the most memorable things about this issue is these two scenes with this police officer stuck in this police vehicle in Springfield that the ninja team happens upon. And both scenes call out Dawn's moral struggle over it, because this is the cop who killed her parents, or at the very least, he was there and he's one of the cops who was involved. I think the comic is quite specific. It's the cop who killed her parents. And one of the things I've always liked about Larry Hama scripts is how much time he jumps ahead from the end of one issue to the beginning of the next. And another way of saying that is, this Latin term in media res, which is to say starting in the middle of the story or starting not at the beginning of the story. And I remember in 1990, how surprised I was when the Snake Eyes trilogy had ended in issue 96. And I went to the bookstore at the mall. This was before I'd found a comic book store. And I bought issue 97. And issue 97 starts with a splash of two Joes hiding behind a car in the city, and the car is getting shot up. And the story has already started. And they didn't have a B or a C plot in the previous two issues that is now coming to the foreground. Hama just throws me in. And they're in trouble, so I'm immediately worried about them. And they were not in the previous issues. So I am immediately playing catch up. And that anxiety, what did I miss? Are they okay? What's happening? Is delicious. And so in even small ways, it's not like in the previous issue, the ninjas are creeping along a street in Springfield and one of them says, "Hey, I see a police car up there. Let's go look." And then in this issue, they come upon it, and then there's this moral dilemma. We've jumped ahead 10 minutes or an hour since the last issue, and I like that. I appreciate it because we had commented on, 295, 296, 297, right before IDW finished publishing, that there were some issues which felt like an issue was covering really similar ground as the previous issue, as if Hama and editorial weren't separating enough one discrete comic book unit script from the next. And so I like this bit where we've jumped ahead. Did we see the Zartan's 18-wheeler crash into a maggot in the previous issue?
Exactly. I was going to say they've kind of got it both ways here. That you've got kind of the almost direct continuation of the last page of the book where Cobra Commander is there with the Heat Vipers facing off against Serpentor's mutant zombies that they've sort of fired on, and they're still sort of they've just shrugged that off and they're continuing on. And it's it's the same characters, the Trooper and the Alley Viper, but then in the sequence with Zartan, it is very much we don't have to be shown absolutely every single thing. We can jump forward and right into the bang into another scene, and in this case we last saw Zartan I think on the road, and here we are picking up just immediately after he's had some sort of crash with a maggot that we've they've not had to spell it out that this is a thing that's happened. They're just throwing us in the middle of it.
Right. I also sort of mentally expected us to jump back to Joe headquarters so that Duke and Mainframe and Psych Out could say something, for a page, or could relay communications from one set of Joes in point A to another set of Joes in point B. And it turns out this issue did not have room for that, and narratively doesn't need it.
So we were talking about sort of the scene with Dawn. Let's maybe linger on that. You could very much sort of see this coming and see potentially where it was going. That sort of the moment that Dawn's parents were sort of fired upon, we knew that there'll be a significant event that would lay groundwork that would definitely need to be followed up. And here they come across the very policeman who fired upon them, who outs himself there. He says, "Oh my God, you're Dawn Moreno. I swear I didn't mean it. She was reaching into the glove compartment, and I thought, you're the one who shot my parents, or at least the one who fired first." Not doing himself any favors there, but he's trapped in this car, and Snake Eyes is sort of giving the police cruiser's handle a bit of a tug. And Scarlet says, "It won't budge, Snake Eyes. There's no getting him out." And they give up and leave him there. I mean, they have to move on because gunfire's getting closer and they can't linger there. But
Storm Shadow does say, if Cobra retakes this section, they'll deal with it. They'll find this cop. He'll be okay.
Right.
And I think that Storm Shadow having it both ways, that this cop may get rescued because we can't do it. We have a more important mission, but also I think we're all mad at this guy. And if Cobra retakes this section, then they'll save their terrible, murderous cop. But if they don't, then we tried.
We tried so hard. We're just a group of the most highly trained ninjas in the world. We don't know how to open car windows.
My brother gave me one of those little hammers. It's neon orange and it's plastic and it's got this little metal pointy bit on it. Yep. And if my car falls into a river, I can smash my way out. I just want to point out compositionally what a nice drawing Paul Pelletier has done on that top panel where we see the cop, as you said, outing himself as the person who shot, because we see him from the point of view of the ninja team, and we are seeing him through the side window. So all the black is actually colored dark red from the red and blue police emergency flashing lights. But in the extreme foreground on the bottom left of that panel, we see Storm Shadow's shoulder. And then on the right side, we see, in reflection of that window, Scarlet's head and her shoulder, and then behind her, Dawn. And the perspective is great because we're looking up at Dawn and Scarlet because they are taller than us, the way that we, quote, the camera are angled. And it's just a small thing, but it's really nice.
Very good.
So should we talk about then the final page to sort of pick up where this scene goes, or the final 2 pages?
Yeah, so this scene is sort of split across the book that they come across him. They're sort of distracted by some rampaging mutants. They sort of beat feet away, and then towards the back of the book again, sort of return to it. And while the rest of the ninjas are continuing to do battle against some Cobra mutants, they realize that Dawn has sort of split off and has gone back to, as they say, deal with that cop. And then on the final page, it's almost like a splash page. It's 3 vertical panels cut in 3 with that left hand being the cop in more distress than when we saw him before. He's in these dark red highlights, sort of, which is now indicating less the flashing of the police car's lights and more the fire sort of burning around him. He's got blood in his coming out of his eyes and his nose, and obvious distress. Help! The fire is almost. What? You came back? Do it. Better that than burning. Do it. And then looking at Dawn, sort of, slightly looking up towards her as if we're looking through the policeman's eyes, and with a silent, impenetrable look, not quite knowing what her decision's going to be.
Yeah, she doesn't say anything. She's not making an expression. Because of the visor, we can't see her eyes. She is neither reaching to help or reaching with a weapon. And so I think the story wants you to think she is going to exact revenge. I think because we know how Larry Hama often writes of characters seeking revenge and regretting it, that she is here to help him. And maybe just for a moment, she's letting him panic so that she can have a kind of revenge and he can feel terrible, even more terrible. I think I think the next issue she will rescue him or have rescued him.
Yeah, that'd be my guess too.
All right, so some other major components of the issue are enhanced various Vipers and soldiers as zombie cyborgs.
Mutants. They're not zombies, remember, from the letters page. Someone was corrected. They're not They're not zombies anymore. They're mutants.
Okay, has that been explained or presented to your satisfaction? Haven't we just been talking about zombies for the last
we have mostly, yeah.
8 Skybound issues, and didn't Mindbender at the end of, in like 298, what's that? It's my zombie bomb.
Yeah, I think to be fair to them, I think that might possibly be the only use of the word zombie in that initial description there, and since then they've tended to avoid the usage, or if that wasn't just the singular one, they have tried to move towards the language being mutants rather than zombies. But yeah, interesting that they sort of corrected it almost in the letter page to say these aren't zombies, these are mutants.
I mean, Larry Hama has said over and over at convention panels and a few times in letters pages, all of G.I. Joe is a retcon. And what he means is the entire ongoing story is me writing things now that I didn't think of then to explain something now, but setting it in the past and sort of retroactively rewriting. And so if, 12 or so issues after Mindbender introduces us to the zombie bomb, it was never really a zombie bomb, it was a mutant bomb, then okay, I'm going to keep slipping.
And they talk about sort of, their thirst for meat and all of the rest of it.
But not in this issue.
Not so much in this issue.
Not at all.
They describe them as being meat. So this is on page 2.
You're all meat, says a
all
mutated
meat.
Cobra soldier. But he doesn't say, and I want to nibble on you.
Yeah, exactly.
He
Yeah,
doesn't say, I'm hungry.
They've done less of that. They've done less of that since 302.
It's sort of like him saying, you're just a target and I'm strong. You're meat.
Yep.
You're nothing. I'm going to shoot you. You're a victim waiting to happen. Oh, hold on. There's one more reference halfway through the issue when the recon team is driving on the Stinger. Mindbender says to Helix, I'm going to eat your brains. And she says, I will shut you down before you get a nibble. And she's pointing a pistol at him.
Yeah, and the distinction, I guess, between a mutant versus a zombie, that zombie kind of does imply that they are dead and they've been brought back to life, which is possibly it's attaching storytelling components to something that we're not seeing. These are alive cobras that have been mutated into something else rather than cobras that have been brought back from the dead.
Right. Yeah, I guess we could use the word zombified, which might not be precise. You might sort of forget and assume that anyone could be zombified. I could be zombified, but Tim, you're alive. To be a zombie, you'd have to be dead and reanimated. All right, so there are a bunch of different kinds of Cobra soldiers here, and I love that. I like Heat Vipers doing Heat Viper things, very specifically loading their ordnance and firing them from their awesome, crazy weapons, which, like 1988 Tim is just, it's 88 or 89. It's just dazzled by.
Yeah, from their flawed weapons, because if they fire too close, they'll have to bypass the internal fuses and switch them to contact ignition instead.
For those of you who don't read the comic but just listen to us, Mark is quoting Cobra Commander or someone asterisk on page 3. I do want to come back to that. Okay, so this battle has an Alley Viper, a Cobra Soldier, a Frag Viper, some Heat Vipers. Later on, we see a Televiper talking to Serpentor Khan. And when the Battle Armor Cobra Commander character rallies the troops, we see 5 little square comic book panels, each with rounded corners, which here does not mean flashback, means on a TV screen or computer monitor. And we see Crimson Guards, is that a Nitro Viper?
I think that's meant to be a his tank viper. His
tank driver. Okay, right. And then a techno viper, and then
Cobra officer,
and then a bugs.
Worms.
Isn't it? Right.
The driver of the maggot.
Thank you. The bug is the vehicle, and then the worm drives the maggot.
And there's also vipers and range vipers and laser vipers and a hulking great mutated night viper too.
Yes. So Diana Davis, I assume, has already assembled all of these visual references, photos pulled from the internet of toys or previous comic book drawings. I think just about everyone in this issue already showed up in a previous issue, so I can imagine the reference that she is providing here for the artist and the color artist has already been assembled, but still, Paul Pelletier is, as someone might point out in the letters page of this issue, drawing this comic book has a lot of specificity that other comics don't, and so Paul Pelletier has a lot of detail to keep track of. He can play with it because the mutated vipers, he doesn't have to get them perfect. If a frag viper, I don't know, had like a wristwatch or a certain strap on his right arm, but now a frag viper who's a mutated mutant, cyborg mutant, has like a big claw octopus arm.
Yeah, like the frag viper that appears early on in the issue is pretty
Page 1.
brilliant. that there's this they have this sort of scoop that they have on their sort of standard outfit for throwing their grenades, which is kind of inspired by the Cesta wicker scoop from the High sport, but sort of transferred into a military environment, and it's kind of like this mutated growth where it's kind of like a sort of fleshy growth mutated arm rather than a sort of separate sort of technical piece, and kind of his backpack that feeds those grenades is also again like an Akira-esque kind of tumor-like growth on his back rather than just a backpack.
I just want to put, while we're on this third panel of page 1, which is the best view of this mutated frag viper, I just want to point out how much storytelling Paul Pelletier is doing in this one panel, because we see the plane up at the top flying away, and this guy has jumped out of it, and then there are other guys smaller behind him who are also falling, and then we also at the bottom of the panel see a little bit of the suburbia of Springfield. We see some trees and houses and the hills in the distance, so that's nice. So even though he's saying we don't need parachutes, just drop us like the living weapons we are, the visual also shows that. Paul Pelletier is still getting comfortable with drawing all of this very specific. Man, this is a hard comic to draw, because in addition to all those vipers, don't forget there are also 4 different Joe ninjas, all of the dreadnoks, right? And he doesn't even get to draw. What's the fun part of drawing Torch? His face or his flame throwing torch weapon? No. Paul Pelletier gets to draw the back of Torch's head and his backpack. And I got to tell you, if I'm drawing a G.I. Joe comic and someone says, okay, draw the Thunder Machine from 3 different angles, also Zorana and Roadpig and Thrasher and Zartan and Baroness and Buzzer and Zanzibar and Torch, I'd think, and then they'd say, oh, here's a turnaround for Torch, because compositionally you might need to see his back, right? And what is it? Is a gas can or is that
it's like
a frame metal backpack thing?
Yeah. It's like a tank of some description that with a feeder wire into his torch.
Okay, so back to page 1. Paul Pelletier is drawing a very cool take on the Strato Viper's helmet, but I wouldn't describe it as toy accurate. Something about the sort of the goggles and the visor and the red part and the gray part and the black part. It's very close, but it's not precisely on model. This is not a problem. I'm not angry or disappointed, but I do notice it. And similarly, when we see the what is it, the recon team on Cobra Island.
Right.
They're driving a Vamp, and when they hit the brakes and we're looking down at them as they're uncovering their boat, Paul Pelletier draws the Vamp from above, and he gets
Stinger.
Sorry?
Stinger. It's a Cobra Stinger.
Yes, thank you.
It's a
Sorry.
modified Cobra Stinger with an open back on it.
Right. Excuse me. The Vamps are green or beige. The Stinger is black. I've had some of those toys. Paul Pelletier draws the Vamp from above, and he gets the door pretty close. And this is a hard angle because the Vamp door is a parallelogram. It's got the front edge and the rear edge are diagonals. It's not a square. It's not a rectangle. He gets it very close, but not perfect. And that is fine. I am not distressed or angry. But here and there, like certain proportions of like the Frag Viper's helmet or the Heat Viper's helmet, Pelletier is still very close to the precise toy model, but not at 100%. And I chalk that up to this is a really hard book to draw. This series, this issue particularly. B, this is his 4th issue ever of this series. And C, he said to us when we interviewed him, I'm much more interested and better at organic stuff like people and poses and clothing, and doing the tech stuff like equipment and vehicles and gear like machine guns is harder. And a Frag Viper helmet is gear.
There is a lot of gear in this issue.
I think a bunch of the Cobra soldiers, I think many of the Cobra Vipers, assorted Vipers in this issue are holding the Frag Viper's submachine gun. And I love it when the 1986 Viper has the 1986 Viper machine gun. In this issue, the 86 Viper does not have his machine gun. That's okay. Either, you can chalk it up to a Viper's running and trips and looks over and picks up someone else's gun and keeps running. Or, if Paul Pelletier, after drawing 113 very specific costumes, vehicles, pieces of equipment, or weapons, takes a small shortcut and says, you know what, for the next 4 pages, everyone's just going to have the same small submachine gun. It's still a Cobra submachine gun. But this comic is the original toyetic comic. So when I see an 86 Viper in battle, I'm certainly ready to see that big machine gun.
Right. Okay, so the big part of this issue was, and the reveal of the last page of the last issue was the return of the Cobra Commander in battle armor. Very iconic outfit that we've not seen in a long time. And reading through the first few pages of this issue, you think, well, Cobra Commander is appearing quite competent in battle here, seemingly quite heroic. I'm not really quite sure it's completely in keeping with normally how capable he is being shown in battle in that kind of way. And lo and behold, there's a good storytelling reason for that, and that's because he is not in the armor. It is a CG, a Fred, as was the case of most of the time in that armor beforehand. That it was Fred V11, which is 7 for everyone else. And so I saw online a little bit of speculation about this Cobra Commander and the fact that his pupils were so the dilation of the pupils made them look very sort of small, intense, almost zombie-like pupils, and so I'm guessing that there may be people with theories that could this be someone other than just a random Fred? Could it actually be Fred 7 returned from the grave like some other characters have been doing, aka Serpentor, Snake Eyes, Mindbender?
Yeah, if you look at page 2, the second panel, there's a close-up of the person, the Cobra Commander battle armor character, and as you just said, his eyes are really tiny, and there is a little bit of sort of squiggliness around his eyes. There's 2 or 3 little squiggle marks that don't look like, the sort of eye socket bone underneath skin or creases next to someone's eyes. It looks like a little boil or a bit of mottled flesh. What made me think that this Cobra Commander in battle armor was acting out of character was on page 3, panel 2, where a Heat Viper is holding one of his rockets, and it looks like he's about to put it into his giant rocket launcher, and he says, "Get those AP rounds loaded," armor piercing. And then the Cobra Commander battle armor character, with his fist raised and some effect lines around his head as if he's yelling or noticing, says, "They're too close. Got to bypass the inertial fuses and switch them to contact ignition." And I thought, that's really technical for Cobra Commander. I think a version of Cobra Commander who sort of knows everything that all of his underlings know and can do. It's like a captain on a spaceship in Star Trek can do a lot of things. Like, he can run engineering in an emergency. He can run con. He can run ops because he's the captain, right? James Cameron, part of why he's such a good filmmaker is that he's done everything, and all the people who work under him, he can do everything they can do. And so he has very little patience for people who do it too slowly. And I thought, oh, this battle armor Cobra Commander is suddenly an expert in very specific Heat Viper ammo or ordnance and like distances. And Cobra Commander could do that, but we'd never seen that. And then I thought, oh, I think these word balloons are pointing to the wrong people. So I don't know if this is an error detected, but look at this panel, Mark, and tell me if Cobra Commander says, "Get those AP rounds loaded," and then the Heat Viper says, "They're too close. Got to bypass the inertial fuses and switch them to contact ignition." Does the panel make a little more sense?
I do think it's intentional.
Okay.
I think it works either way. That if that bottom right hand balloon, they're too close, got to bypass, etc. That could be pointing towards the other Heat Viper. So it's 2 Heat Vipers talking to one another about what they're doing.
But the Cobra Commander is definitely saying something in this panel because of the lines over his head and his fist.
Yeah, exactly. He looks like he's, his arm is raised and it looks like he's commanding. So I think it makes better sense the way that it is done, that he's commanding and he's, issuing very specific commands that they should bypass the inertial fuses. And by doing so as well, it alerts us, the reader, that something is up with this Cobra Commander, that he has got all of this very specific knowledge, that he is unlike him to be issuing such detailed commands about the details of a kit. So it's a clue as to it not, another clue in addition to the way that he behaves in the subsequent panels, that maybe this isn't the actual Cobra Commander.
And that's starting on that previous page where we see his tiny, tiny eyes, and he says, "Reload with armor piercing, aim for center of mass," because that is another specific thing that I feel, like Cobra Commander has never said the thing like their angle's too low, we can't traverse the weapons down. The turrets don't angle down like that. Like everyone else has said that. Cobra Commander has not. This issue, you had made the point in a previous episode talking about the Skybound Real American Hero issues that if you have a bunch of Cobras now mutated and or cyborgs, perhaps it is more palatable to shoot them.
Yep.
And so now the Real American Hero series can be more action, more
deadly.
Yeah. And in fact, this issue, on the bottom of page 3, those 4 Heat Vipers who are accompanying the character of Battle Armor Cobra Commander, their heads all get blown up by this mutated Frag Viper, Cobra Soldier, and Alley Viper. And hey, there's a Cobra Soldier holding a tiny Frag Viper.
Yeah, nondescript, kind of
submachine gun. That's okay. And he's got 3 fingers like Nightcrawler. And I saw this panel on the bottom where the 4 heat vipers are getting shot, and I thought, well, now I feel like it's trying to have it both ways, because their heads are exploding within their frag viper helmets, right?
Heat viper helmets.
The Wham, Ka-chung, and Frap, and there's no blood. And I don't really want to see their heads explode from machine gun fire with like an explosion of blood and gore and brain and skull pieces, right? A lot of it would be helmet stuff, but I sort of felt like this panel was almost pretending like they're also cyborgs, they're also mutants, because elsewhere in the issue, when the mutant cyborgs get cut up or blown up or shot, there is no red blood. There's like not a lot of liquid, or it's like sort of green or gray or brown. And again, I'm not in favor of a bunch of Larry Hama stories having horrendous violence, because like now I'm older and G.I. Joe's always been about battle, and we can finally, PG-13 really means something now, or whatever it is. But either, if you're going to sort of play it straight, there should be blood here, and so either they should have been shot somewhere else, or there should be more sort of silhouettes, or they should be like Cobra bats or something. And then I wanted to ask you what you thought about, besides this panel, Mark, the amount of shooting and chopping in this issue of these mutated characters.
Yeah, I think, because of that mutated aspect, it seems less gory, and they're definitely not playing up the blood element here, as you say, where, the impact or the remains kind of doesn't amp up the gore, even when Road Pig is smashing the Viper's head off with his sort of cinder block club. That's done in a slightly more cartoony way. The eyes are sort of going all boggly, and even though you see, I think, a little hint of a spine, there isn't any sort of blood or what you'd call gore there. And similarly, later on that same page, when Buzzer is slicing into a range viper with his chainsaw, or the Thunder Machine is cutting someone in half, it's not approached in a kind of a gory fashion. It's sort of slightly cartooned up, that you're getting the action but without the gore.
Yeah, and then a couple pages later, when the ninja team chops up this mutated cyborg Night Viper, same thing.
Yeah.
So in fact, the Night Viper, when it gets decapitated by Dawn, it makes the sound effect that the Revanch Blue Ninjas make when they get killed. It goes scree, which I think is a Larry Hama sound effect for many electronic things having difficulty. So okay, Road Pig, when he was introduced in Marvel, help me out, is it issue 83? Or he's got the cover of 84, right? The Ron Wagner cover where he's pointing. It's just just him in close up.
He's on the cover of 83 by Ron Wagner.
In the 80s and 90s issues, not years, for the Marvel G.I. Joe, Road Pig had a dual personality where he would switch from being sort of dumb, and he would have regular sort of all caps word balloons, and then he would switch to this sort of highly educated, like almost quoting like Shakespeare or like English philosophers, and
Donald
letterer
persona.
Sorry,
the persona called Donald.
Right. Okay. So he had this other personality, and letterer Rick Parker would do those word balloons in lowercase. And I think those were dropped because, the whole reason why in comic books lettering has always been uppercased is that uppercase letters are all the actual little bits of them are further apart from each other. And so if you have sort of an uppercase R, the hoop, the circle part at the top of it, might fill in with black ink. And if all the letters are lowercase, they're closer together, and those hoops, like a lowercase O is smaller and closer to itself than an uppercase O. And so printing was so crappy in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s that sort of anything you could do to have the lettering or the artwork sort of less likely to sort of bleed or obstruct itself, you would. And so that's why comic book lettering is uppercase. And it's not until like Ultimate Comics at Marvel in the 2000s, starting in 2000, that sort of publisher-wide or line-wide, you have a lot of lowercase or, mixed lettering. Anyway, I don't quite remember, but I feel like maybe once or twice in the IDW Real American Hero, Road Pig shows up and does have some Road Pig and Donald dialogue that is not differentiated. It's all uppercase. And in this scene, I think he's just sort of not doing either of them anymore. He's just a big guy. And so I wanted to ask you, is he still doing Donald and Road Pig? Did Hama forget? What's up with the lettering?
He seems to be doing the Donald bit, but in standard lettering, in terms of the kind of, it's the flowery verbiage, the overlong oldie English kind of words that he's using. Dreadlocks are always prepared to render violence to all and sundry. Egad, what a particularly repugnant and misshapen example of mutated carrion.
Right.
I shall have to sweeten its abhorrent countenance by the judicious removal of its most loathsome appendage.
Okay. So it's all Donald, and sort of dumb Road Pig is either gone or not here at all in this scene.
Yeah. You kind of need it, that in a kind of a more lowercasey, flowery kind of font, and then at the end of it, Road Pig going, "Yeah, I bashed that guy good,"
right,
or something.
Right. Yeah. All right. So maybe my letter for this issue to the letters page will be, "Hey, I really like the old device of Road Pig having his two personalities visually separated by uppercase and lowercase word balloons. Might you bring that back? Did someone forget that Road Pig has two personalities? I know it's a crowded book and there may not be space in All right, I'll stop.
Hey, speaking of Cobra Commander in disguise, it's revealed that it is not Cobra Commander in the battle armor, but instead he is back at the base looking at things from the monitors, and probably slightly jealous that the other guy is doing such a good job. Knowing his somewhat thin skin, he's dressed up in his standard go-to mufti costume, which was introduced in issue 55, Unmaskings, a beret, circular sunglasses, and a floppy moustache.
I think that's technically a Fu Manchu.
The Fu Manchu moustache, which doesn't get so much use these days. This is a look that he's gone back to, particularly in the IDW Arah era. So it's kind of his go-to look when he is not in a Cobra uniform. But interesting that he's chosen to use this as he's hanging out. Is clearly a look that he's fond of, and maybe it's ended up being, maybe that's what he just actually looks like and pretends it's a disguise. If you keep on doing it, maybe it's just what you look like.
What are these two things on the back of the battle armor that are sticking up over the shoulders?
Good question, Tim. I think this is the Cobra Commander battle armor's backpack, which is kind of a pointy triangular shape, a bit like the Star Trek logo. And I think there is not a consistency about how that backpack is applied. Sometimes it will be with the triangle pointing down, which is, I think, what it's doing here, such that the other pointy ends act, like sort of almost pointy shoulder pads coming up just behind his shoulders. But I certainly, when I was younger, used to have it the other way around, with the tip of the triangle pointing upwards. And I noticed that at 3D Joe's, that is the way that Carson has chosen to display it as well, with the backpack.
Right. Okay.
Pointing up.
This is helpful because my brother had the 1987 Cobra Commander battle armor action figure. The few times he used the backpack, he had it as you say, like the Star Trek triangle logo, not as you would say upside down. But I am, and then we stopped using it because it was dumb. And then, this Cobra Commander doesn't need a backpack. His battle armor costs more than a jet, and like, can it take a missile or something? But I'm looking at the Hector Garrido painting for the original toy package, and I think that's why Carson may have put it that way at 3D Joe's, because in the original painting, and I don't have the Ron Rudat action figure, turnaround drawing to compare, but in the original toy package painting, it is, as you would say, upside down.
But confusingly as well, the actual armor itself does kind of have these pointy shoulder pad things, which
are not in the painting.
Which are not in the painting.
Right. Okay.
So, half a dozen of one, 6 of the other kind of thing that may, what is going on with that, exactly that image, hard to say. Yeah, given the placement, it kind of, looks, in that painting does look more like the upside down backpack, which, some I think posit that maybe that's a jetpack, a miniature jetpack that maybe could help him fly, but who knows?
Something that Hama usually does that he doesn't do here, when we cut back to Cobra Island halfway through the issue, at the actual centerfold, literally in the middle of the issue, and we check in with the recon team, the characters don't reintroduce themselves.
True.
We don't, no one says Helix's name, no one says Muskrat's name, Molto's name. Someone does say Mindbender, right? Helix says, "You planning on heating up leftovers, Dr. Mindbender?"
And that's his reply is actually a callback to, maybe, is it issue 50 or something like that? Why waste good genetic material? Which I think is something very similar to what he said when he threw Storm Shadow's body into the pot as he was, mixing up the original Serpentor.
In the panel under that, there's another vamp door that's drawn as a rectangle,
square,
not a parallelogram.
90-degree angles there on the door.
What do they call their boat? Is it a Zodiac?
A Zodiac boat, yeah.
Is that a G.I. Joe thing, or is that a military thing?
This is a standard military term for that, or, well, I don't think it even has to be military. I think it's a standard term for that sort of semi-rigid, inflatable boat.
Okay. I'm going to pretend, since this comic book is so toyetic, that is actually the Cobra Night Landing boat, but in its Joe recolors from, like not Tiger Force or Night Force, but some, the Slaughters Marauders blue and green and brown and beige recolor of the Cobra Night Landing, which is the Slaughters Marauders Zodiac. I'm going to pretend that it is a specific G.I. Joe vehicle and not just a general, military or civilian boat thing.
Yeah.
In the same way that if what's the name of the the surf, the windsurf thing from 1982 or 1983?
Manta.
Thank you. I apologize to all of the toy collectors who know the first 2 years inside and out. I don't have them fully memorized. But that thing, if the Joes in some Larry Hama story wash up on a beach and they grab someone's surfboard and make a quick getaway, I would just in my brain rewrite that scene, that they'd run over and dig up the Manta. It's a good thing we hid the Manta here. Let's get away on our very specific Hasbro item, the G.I. Joe Manta.
Funny enough, what's it called? The Cobra Night Landing did see release in a few different formats, including a repaint as a Joe vehicle called the Night Landing Seal Raft in 1997.
Yeah, isn't it basically the same color? It goes from dark blue to black, or from black to black. Yeah. So yes, almost. Thank you.
So yeah, interesting that the Joe team is skedaddling off of Cobra Island, trying to make their escape after being in considerable hot water last time. They take with them the mutated Mindbender, but also they decide that freezer compartment containing the body of what looks to be Serpentor is significant enough that they decide to pick that up and take that away with them as well.
Remind me, what was the potential continuity error that you called out with the last issue? Because I said, oh, we've seen this refrigerated Serpentor body back in issue 90, and you said, but
after that, we saw the Serpentor body falling to his death at the bottom of the pit in issue 213, I think it is. And that was a body that the Joes had found of the original Serpentor.
Okay, so when the Joes said they found the body of the original Serpentor, there isn't a scene that we see in those IDW issues where they are like retrieving that body on ice. What happens to that body on ice after issue 90? Is it on the landlocked freighter?
So it's in the landlocked freighter. Firefly uses it to pretend that it's his body and escape from the landlocked freighter and replaces, I think, dresses up the Serpentor body with his uniform. And then I think that is probably the last we hear of it until...
Okay, and then Hawk or someone...
Yeah.
Just before 213, when the Joes bring back Serpentor? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
At Joe headquarters?
Yeah, that's right.
And we'll control him. This isn't a terrible idea at all. Okay, so there's a gap enough that Hama could explain away this potential error. I mean, this isn't the same box. This isn't the same ice that's kept the Serpentor body. It feels like it's supposed to be the same body that we saw in issue 90, and then that Firefly swapped out for when he made his escape. But there's enough space that Hama could say something like, oh yeah, the Joes went to the landlocked freighter and they retrieved everything, and they sliced off the index finger and they cloned that into the new Serpentor who dies in issue 213. We still got the body over there. Or Mindbender grew his own when, after issue 90, before that body is lost in the landlocked freighter. Mindbender grew his own new Serpentor body from the Serpentor corpse, right? Something like this?
Something maybe like that. The oddity is that so I am flipping back to issue 208, which is when the Joes were introduced to the Serpentor body, and the sort of the freezer containment unit that was used for the Serpentor looks quite similar to the one here. It's kind of like a human, sized freezer with a glass panel on the front.
Maybe that's just a standard body refrigerating unit, and both Cobras and Joes would have them.
Yeah, they say, we found the perfect subject, but of course we would have to repair the damage done by Zartan's arrow first. The implication is that it's the original Serpentor.
But also in issue 308, in our last Hama episode, when we first see this corpse, it's got eye damage as if it took an arrow to the face.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So, and it's, I think, still got the arrow there.
It seems like that would get infected, like you'd remove that.
Indeed. It seemed to be fairly light on the exact specifics of how they recovered the body, but there's wiggle room that you can, retcon stuff. One of the questions I had around this was around the bodies in the freighter and that kind of thing. Is that you had Fred 7 in there in the landlocked freighter, so wiggle room there for a resurrected Fred if you're resurrecting other characters. And then the other thought was that if this is Serpentor, somehow they've got him back from the bottom of the pit where he sort of fell to his doom with Serpentor, that maybe at the same time they've actually got the original Snake Eyes' body back as well at the same time. So perhaps the returned Snake Eyes might be in his original body rather than just some random cloned body.
This Snake Eyes who's back is in that homunculus body
Mm.
that Mindbender had at the casino.
Yeah.
And Mindbender wouldn't have been able to get the original Snake Eyes body from the bottom of the chasm under the pit.
But if he was able to get the original Serpentor back from that location,
Oh.
I'm trying to think of jumping through the loops of how the logic for this worked. That if that is the same original Serpentor body with the damaged eye that was felt his doom at the bottom of the pit, then Snake Eyes would be the dead body of Snake Eyes would be in the same location.
Right, and they would also get that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm saying it's a thought process.
So, all right, so we don't have an explanation for why, but how would Mindbender get the original Serpentor body from the bottom of the pit all the way to the casino on Cobra Island and then stick an arrow in it?
It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? No.
So I always want to defer to Hama. You know, it's his book. He's written almost all of it, effectively all of it. And, you know, he was throwing some weird curveballs in the 80s and 90s, and he always, you know, handled them well. I was never sold on Serpentor coming back in, you know, 208 through 213. It's a really fun, interesting character, but I feel like part of the freedom of not having to introduce 20 new characters and another 20 vehicles every 12 issues of the comic, and being able to just sort of focus on, you know, like a core 25 characters, like the ninjas and some dreadnoks, and Baroness and Destro, is that no one's making you, like, Hama had to bring back Mindbender after he killed Mindbender, because there was a new Mindbender toy.
Mhm.
And that was always the risk of killing someone off, that there might be a new toy. It's like in the 90s when there were Star Wars novels, you know, that like didn't really count, but they were written as if they did. And if someone ever went and made new Star Wars movies that contradicted what was in one of those novels wouldn't count. And it certainly happened for Star Trek with a wonderful novel called Star Trek Federation. It was completely undone by Star Trek Generations, the movie. But that's okay. So here's Hama, like, bringing back a lot of characters. And, you know, if I always got the sense that he didn't love Serpentor. That Serpentor was something he was saddled with. But, you know, I might be making that up. I don't know that I can remember an interview where he said that. But what did he do? 2 years later, he killed Serpentor and he got rid of him. At the same time, in a story like My Dinner with Serpentor in Yearbook 3, it seems like he really likes the character, or at least can figure out something fun to do with him. But I was always puzzled, why bring back this character? Why bring back Dr. Venom in the IDW run? There's so many other Cobra characters that, you know, like Scrap Iron or Major Blood or Zanzibar, you know, or like even, you know, Gristle or the Headman, who maybe they're sort of not yours and you don't like them. Anyway, so I feel like bringing back Serpentor as Genghis Khan, like, that's a really new, interesting wrinkle. And maybe we're heading towards a Serpentor versus Serpentor, you know, story. And that could be really fun. I also feel like there's just a lot of potential to get bogged down in this sort of complicated continuity. And, you know, it's any comic with 300 issues is going to have continuity. But with so many resurrections and also cyborgs and mutants, this is starting to feel like X-Men, where I feel like people sort of stop reading it because it gets overly complicated or it seems like it's losing a focus. So I'm enjoying that things are still converging around Springfield, and I'm enjoying that there are, you know, new characters and old characters, Dawn and Molto and, you know, Helix, and, you know, I think something interesting is going to happen with the Dreadnoks and the Baroness. Okay. The broad strokes of this story, like whether they're zombies or mutants, if it gives the book license to kill a lot more of them, or to do it in more exciting ways or more often or more, you know, something. You can chop off heads and arms if you're a ninja, and you can, you know, but what, you know, wasn't it interesting enough when it was just this colorful cast of different kinds of vipers who are all specialists, you know, like, oh, also now they're like unkillable, but also they sort of want to eat your flesh, but they don't really talk about it. So, I keep waiting for someone to say something like, did Duke say this 2 issues ago? We can't let the zombies, we can't let the mutants get to Springfield because they'll eat people.
Mhm.
And then we'll have a zombie outbreak in America. And I feel like whether they're zombies or mutants, it's not being fully taken advantage of. What is the threat? Because it seems like it's, now that we're not saying zombies, we're saying mutants, and they're also cyborgs. They're sort of bigger and taller and harder to kill. But, it was a worldwide, well-funded terrorist army before. Wasn't that sort of enough?
Yeah, and I think the big question for me in my mind is kind of, we've had this big mutant story which has dominated this first year of the Arah relaunch. What's going to be the next big thing? Are they going to, I'm assuming that, the third arc in, we're probably going to sort of move focus away from the invasion of Springfield and onto something slightly different, slightly new. So I'm quite excited to think about what that might be, what might come next, what the next big thing will be. Will we see some of those cute, cool characters who have been on the back burner explore something that's a little less well trodden now by this point?
Yeah, I am concerned that in the way that the Blue Ninjas, the Revanche, sort of unstoppable AI robots showed up in the IDW run in the 230s or the 240s, and came back several times and are still, in the book. They've shown up in the Skybound issue in the early 300s. And that's just a permanent faction that's out there, and Hama can go back to them. And that's interesting. Like in a general sense, in theory, I like it. And I don't need them to be fully resolved and all wiped out and, deprogrammed and destroyed and, boxed up and sort of put into an incinerator. I don't need that to be completely tied off. But the Blue Ninjas, some people would say when they wrote in or online, they'd say like, oh, I don't love those characters, or, like it kept going back there and it sort of didn't seem interesting, or it didn't fulfill its full potential. And so I'm wondering, is the mutant thing going to be this sort of additional faction that's just out there for the next 60 issues that sometimes shows up and sometimes doesn't get mentioned? And does that just sort of clutter up everything? Because there's already a lot of factions. There's the Destro faction, the Cobra Commander faction, the sort of, if there are any evil ninjas out there, like Red Ninjas, and then the Dreadnought faction. I think I would like to know that somehow Serpentor Khan and the mutants are going to be mostly taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And either they sort of take over all of Cobra and they're the new Cobra, or in the way that the Iron Grenadiers for a little while were a permanent and sort of like sensical, like third faction. Are the next 50 issues going to be about some characters trying to defend the rest of America from marauding mutants? Is Serpentor Khan going to try and, take like Washington State and Oregon? And I don't think Hama knows. He says he makes it up as he goes, and I think he doesn't know what's happening at the end of the issue as you're writing at the beginning, and he B also doesn't know what's happening 2 issues or 5 issues down the road. And he has said, when he's tried to write sort of multi-part arcs where the ending is kind of pre-decided, the story he doesn't write as good a story, and he's not satisfied. And so, and when the editors or the publisher wants him to write a little description for the catalogs for, 2 months in advance, he sort of ends up not, when he gets to writing the issue, not writing the little blurb that he said he was going to, because the ideas change and he's making up as he goes. Mm-hmm. And I don't think this book meanders. That is a negative word, and that's not what happens. But this book does chug along. It always just chugs along. And every month, Hama puts out 20 more pages. And I think to some extent, in the next 2 6 issues, there's going to be a bigger fight at Springfield where more characters converge. It's already happening. And I don't know that Skybound is nudging him, or he's thinking I should sort of keep this to 5 or 6 issues at a time because of the paperback collections. If there's an anniversary issue, like 50, 200, 250, he certainly tries, 275. Hama certainly tries to have a thing happen. And, we don't have any numbering like that coming up. I've never known where G.I. Joe is going, and I don't need to, but I've always had faith that it's going somewhere interesting. And I don't know if I have that for the mutants. Because I feel like, as fascinating as it is to have not just a frag viper, but a frag viper who's like 3 inches taller and is part metal and part flesh-eating, weirdo. It's like the Joes sort of haven't reacted. Like, oh my God. It's like, Mark, if you showed up at a convention and you had like shaved your head and had tattoos on your arm, I would say, oh my God, you look so different. Right now, imagine you and I are fighting, and all of a sudden you're 3 inches taller and like your machine gun is part of your arm. Right. So, in the same way that I would love a little scene where more Joes react to Snake Eyes coming back from the dead and Snake Eyes talking. I'm missing some sort of recognition of just how weird and crazy it is that this faction of Cobra has leveled up.
Because next issue is going to be 310. Feels like 20 pages would be too little to wrap everything up in a satisfying way. And then having seen the solicits for 311 with the Thunder Machine on the front cover there, and the return of Chris Mooneyham following a 1 month off break from we'll have a 2 month gap. It looks like they are going to return to that same plot. Cobra Commander's trap in Springfield has been unleashed, is the blurb. So look, it looks like we'll have at least a little bit more of this story. There won't be that clean break of 2 month gap and a new artist coming on. I think there will be definite bleed into the next, in inverted commas, arc, even if Larry Hama doesn't think he writes in arcs.
Yeah, Skybound has crunched their numbers and, looked at their cash flow cycles, and it makes sense for them to do, for a series like this, paperbacks for every 5 issues. And that's great. And I really appreciate the consistency of having Mooneyham on for 5, Pelletier on for 5, and Mooneyham on for, I hope, 5. And then, someone else or Mooneyham again on for another 5 or 3. Like, what I don't want is, half an issue to be inked by someone else and it looks really rushed, and then, an issue to be a week late and drawn by 4 different people, and then the regular artist comes back on for a month, and then they do another month, but it looks really rushed, and it's just sort of all... I don't need 5 issues from one artist and 5 issues from another artist to line up with parts 1 through 5 of a 5-part story. It can all be this ongoing, overlapping story the way that it always was. And, the Snake Eyes trilogy was a rare exception, and the first time it had happened that a story, like even the Cobra Civil War in the 70s, not the years, the numbers, it's, 72 to 78 roughly. And you could do a sort of a collection that just has that story, but those issues didn't have, chapter so-and-so on the cover. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until IDW, several years in, was it Cobra World Order, starting with 220 or 221, that G.I. Joe Monthly had a specific, arc with numbered parts.
They had the Death of Snake Eyes before that.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. That was 4 parts.
Yeah, so IDW era of Arah started with 155.5, and it takes them quite a while. It's not until 212 that they sort of actually start dividing up the issues into named arcs. So the first one being Death of Snake Eyes, and then they roll on into Cobra Rising, which is, I think, one of those arcs which isn't really an arc, but they've just given it a name because I think there's a standalone issue within there. And then they're into Cobra World Order, And then they're in Cobra Nation. And then there's Snake in the Grass. And then there's a gap for a bit, and it's Dawn of the Arashikage. And then I think they keep on going after that with arcs pretty much until the end. Special missions, the Cobra's Venom, Artificial Intelligence, Snake Hunt, Untold Tales, Murder by Assassination, Spotlight, then High Stakes, and All In, which gets us to the end. And, you know, while those were given names as arcs, a lot of those are definitely not distinct and sort of bleed on from one issue to the next. And definitely for some of those, the end of one arc and the beginning of the next is pretty indistinguishable.
Sort of in all of my comment about, you know, Springfield and the mutants and, you know, where is Hama going, or, you know, are the Blue Ninjas coming back? I don't need numbered chapters, and I don't need a definitive final part of a story. But I think we all, you know, respond to some definition, like issue 50, 49 and 50, the Battle of Springfield. You know, I love issue 200. I think about issue 200 a lot. And, you know, I really want something big to happen with Serpentor Khan and the real Cobra Commander, whether they're specifically meeting on the battlefield, whether they're matching wits tete-a-tete from their respective headquarters as their various soldiers are meeting on the battlefield, and, you know, some Joes and some Dreadnoks are kind of in the middle. Anyway, so I think this is gonna key into my Yo Joich score for this issue. But before we get there, Mark, did you have any other? We should talk about the letters page. Are we done? Are we done talking about the comic?
Yeah, don't talk about the comic. There's a letters page. There's a big letter in there from someone connected to the show again. It's of course I'm talking about the letter from our Patreon supporter Chris Bourdillon, who writes, "Greetings from Baton Rouge, the official home of Revanche. Lol. Thank you, Skybound, for the continuation of Arah, and thank you, Mr. Hama, for all your years of service, military and comics. I've been reading this book since issue 23, and it's such a joy to see it continue. Please keep up the amazing work. Thanks, Chris Bourdillon."
Congrats, Chris.
Yeah. Congratulations, Chris, on your letter. I think that was all of the important letters, wasn't it, Tim?
That's the end of our episode. As a score, I give this a 17. Nobody Beats Knocking Joe, Real American podcast, and we'll see you next week. Mark is being coy and hilarious because the next letter in this letters page is from Mark. And rather than being slightly jealous and amazed and jealous like I was the last time that Mark got a letter. Mark, how many letters
in the last
total?
issue?
How many letters
are
total?
Are we about 5 now? I think I've lost count.
across. Sorry, are we counting all Skybound or all G.I. Joe comics?
It might be more. It might be 6. I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to do a proper tally because I'm losing track now.
Is this where should I brag that I got a letter printed in Black Panther like 20 years ago?
So. This guy writes, "Dear Postbox, The Pit, Arah 305 was another great issue. It feels like the stakes are really ratcheting up. I'm looking forward to the various factions coming crashing together. Cobra, Serpentor, the Joes, Revanche, Destro, and Zartan too. Oh my! A big congratulations to Chris Moneyham on delivering the first 5 issues from Skybound. Drawing G.I. Joe is hard and presents a host of challenges that artists don't face on most other books. Every issue has looked gritty, dramatic, and full of tension and gravitas. I look forward to Mooneyham's next secret project. Special missions, a yearbook, untold tales from G.I. Joe's past, a flashback to the LLRP, a spotlight on some of the new Joes like Sherlock, or even the story of how Jeffrey, Dr. Mindbender's Techno-Viper assistant, made his escape from Cobra Island before the bomb detonated. Whatever it is, I'll be there. And in the meantime, very much looking forward to seeing how Paul Pelletier will handle some Joe action. Yo, Joe! Mark, Talking Joe Seddon at Talking Joe Podcast.
Editor Alex Antone's response. Yo, Mark, welcome back to the pit. And yes, a hearty congrats to Mooneyham and a hip, hip hooray to Paul Pelletier for finishing his 4th issue. And it might be his best one yet, eh? Mooneyham's next project is none other than issue 311 and beyond. So look for that at your local comic shop this fall. All right, so a couple comments. One, I was pleasantly surprised and delighted when I saw that you had a letter because it sort of swung back around. Now, instead of being envious, I just sort of chuckled aloud and thought, awesome. Good job, Mark, getting in there, having another sort of not too short, not too long, not too vague, a little specificity, some compliment, and then asking a question that hopefully gets answered because we do have questions. And congrats on getting Talking Joe, those 2 words in print again. Congrats on both to you and the editor, no typos.
Wow, I think this is the first.
So what we now have is confirmation that Mooneyham is coming back to the regular book and not doing something extra.
Mm-hmm.
And when Mooneyham was not drawing the book 5 or so months ago, and someone else would be drawing the book, the letters page hinted that Mooneyham would be doing something extra or different or special that was related. And I think either plans changed and that isn't happening, or if I recall the wording of it, it was like, wait till you see Mooneyham's, top secret G.I. Joe thing coming up.
Mm-hmm.
That was them being coy and just using the language of G.I. Joe, like top secret and classified and, uncovered, to say, whatever he's doing, we can't talk about it yet, but you'll love it and it's connected. And those are all technically true. We're going to love him back on the regular book. It is connected because it's the regular book. So I do have to say I'm a little disappointed that this isn't a reveal where they say, yes, he's coming back to do the regular book, but also there's a special on the side, as you said, a special missions or a yearbook or something that it sort of seems like, oh, wait, but didn't he have 5 months off? Couldn't he have drawn, 3 additional issues? Well, maybe he's getting that much further ahead with 311 and beyond. Maybe he was wrapping up his final issue sort of so late in the game that he needed some time to recharge. He's a freelancer and, maybe he took on some other work to recharge his batteries before coming back to draw G.I. Joe. A million things happen with people making comics. Someone catches a cold and they're a week behind, and then, someone else has to draw the whole new issue. So I'm a little bit let down by the sort of factual reveal of this response, but I do appreciate that you teed them up to give a big reveal if there was one. And I would certainly rather the reply be, no, he's coming back for 311. He was great, and you get this consistency and the sort of prime visual identity of the new A Real American Hero Skybound book. We're coming back to it. That at least we get sort of a proper reassurance there. I also appreciate that. I don't know if something's in the letters page, it's canon, but Jeffrey the Techno Viper is now...
It's printed canon.
It's not just in the podcast.
Yeah. That's probably the highlight. Jeffrey the Techno Viper has seen print in the pages of A Real American Hero in some form, even if it is just my letter.
Some Joe fans have gotten a little bit of artwork and a photo or two printed in the letters page. Maybe you need to write one more letter with a drawing of Jeffrey the Techno Viper. Like him and Dr. Mindbender and some hilarious word balloon, and you can say, this is my concept of, and then they print it, and then it's even more slightly almost canon.
Yeah, brilliant.
I continue to be really appreciative that the editors put together a letters page, and it's 3 pages for this book, because even if sometimes I'm a little frustrated because someone writes in and says, I don't understand why the Transformers are hanging out with Cobra Commander. It's, no, it's two separate continuities. I mean, I'm reading The Walking Dead Deluxe right now every 2 weeks. It's great. Speaking of Skybound books, which reprints The Walking Dead in color. And they include the original letters. And then every 6 issues, they'll do new letters written, now for the new color issues, including the old letters. And a couple times someone has said, man, your letters page is really tough. People really complain. And they say, 9 out of 10 letters we get, this is back in like 2006, are people complimenting the book and saying they love it. And they're not that interesting. So we print mostly the negative letters. And so you never know when you're reading a letters page what sampling you're getting of the readership's opinions, because, squeaky wheel in the grease, maybe it's only the people who have a complaint who are more likely to write in. It definitely feels like, just from reading the letters page, the last 9 issues, that people who were reading the Marvel book are reading the Skybound book. We've had several letters from people who, go all the way back to issue 1. And here we have someone who goes back to, issue 23. If I ever get a letter printed in the Skybound, I might mention that I go back to issue 90. And then we've got a few people who've asked about the IDW issues. But it doesn't seem, from this very unscientific sampling of whoever wrote in and then whoever gets printed, it doesn't seem like there are a lot of people who became fans during the IDW run and are still fans. And I wonder if that subtly speaks to the diminishing of fandom or of sales across the IDW run. If sort of a reader of Real American Hero at Skybound is more likely to be like you or me, someone who is a Joe fan from the 80s or 90s, knows the Marvel book or has the Marvel book, maybe sampled and then dropped, or maybe got through most or all of the IDW run, but is definitely on board or is definitely back for the Skybound run. And if I could poll, all the people who are reading this new run, 301 to 309, I'd be really interested to know what percentage of them tried some of or all of the IDW issues and are back, and to whatever extent sort of like this more. Because sort of going back to, as I was reading the IDW run, it was good. There were a lot of things that weren't working for me. And I kept thinking, man, there's no way a different publisher could pick this up and make these changes, right? And yet, that happened. So even though I might not give this the highest Yojoage score, and even though I might spend 4 minutes straight of this podcast sort of talking about blue ninjas and cyborgs and not quite knowing what it adds up to, I'm so appreciative of this series. Like I can't believe, we've got Andy Kubert and Brad Anderson G.I. Joe covers. And Andy Kubert is not like phoning them in. It's not just like Snake Eyes with no background, and they're not just getting anyone to draw this book. They're getting, Mooneyham had already been in comics for years before doing G.I. Joe. Pelletier, certainly. If it sounds like I'm spending a lot of time, griping, I am. I still love this. I still love this series.
Yeah, I think it's if something's solid and it's good, then it's easier in some ways to gripe because you can isolate the bits that don't work. Whereas if you don't like any of it, you can just sort of point generally and go, well, that thing, everything, having a couple of points that you can pick up that you think maybe could have been better or not quite perfect. You can be much more specific about that when the rest of it is good. And I think this one, it's a solid issue. It's, we're right smack bang in the middle of the story. It's sort of building to the crescendo, a lot of action focused mostly around the same location. The art is very solid. Paul Pelletier does a good job generally. There's not really any confusion in the storytelling. Very easy to read. Solid stuff. So I'd say overall a solid 7.
Before I give a number, I just wanted to point out that I think this is the first issue of G.I. Joe where there's a preview that's not sort of Hasbro related.
I think we might have had the creature from the Black Lagoon in maybe another issue, but this is certainly the least G.I. Joe. the preview that we've got in the back here, the greatest comic ever, Ultra Mega by the incomparable James Harron.
Who are you quoting when you say that?
This is how they tee it up in the letters page.
Okay, that's Alex Antone, editor. So we get a 4-page preview of the beginning of the next arc of Ultra Mega. Issue 5 is coming in September. And I got to say, everyone, I read issues 1 through 4 when they came out, and they were tremendous. Each one was double-sized. And I'm trying to remember. It's like a kaiju and body horror book. And it's great. I very briefly met James Harron once, actually in Somerville, in the city where I live. He lived nearby and then moved away, and he's one of these just very, very talented comics artists. And I don't think I was really tracking at the time that he was either writing or looking to write. And he's written this really weird, gross, awesome, exciting, kinetic book at Skybound. And I recommend it. G.I. Joe Real American Hero 309, I will give a 7, maybe a 6. I'll give a 7.
So I think we're done with 309. Next time on Talking Joe, we will be covering the issues as they come out. So G.I. Joe A Real American Hero 3010.
3010?
So 3010. So next time on Talking Joe, we will be continuing to cover the issues as they come out. When issue 310 comes out on September the 18th, we will be there. And in the meantime as well, we will also be covering the other releases from Skybound. Destro and Scarlet continue. G.I. Joe #1 is on the horizon. And in the meantime, we will also be dipping back into the Devil's Due era in our Disavowed episodes, as well as all sorts of other interesting and exciting content. You can find us on the usual places, which are linked to from talkingjoe.co.uk, which is the website. We're on Facebook. We've got a group over there. Do jump on in. The water's warm. Talking Joe is on Twitter and Instagram, and we're on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe, where our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Ryan, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, and Frank are getting early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. There is also a guarantee that any Patreon listeners that write in to the letters page have their letters fast-tracked to the top and get printed. This is not a guarantee.
There's a partial guarantee that we'll read the letter if it gets printed.
Yeah, and I recognize the name and that kind of thing.
How about that, folks? A partial guarantee.
Yeah, a possibility of a guarantee. It's 100% of the time, 50% of the time. Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
My brick and mortar comic shop in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics. With my creative partners, our website for video essays about TV and film is atomicabe.com. That's like Abraham Lincoln, Atomic Abe. And I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. So that is us done for this episode. But until next time, remember that...
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast!
Laters.